Okay, hello. I am here with my grandma who decided to do this interview for us. Hi,
Hi.
would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Liz Jobbett.
Okay, so I, so you gave me a list of events that you have lived through that are significant to Canada in a certain way. So, yes, I have prepared some questions for you to answer. So the first question that I'd like to start off with is, how long have you lived in Canada?
74 years in Canada and 2 years in the States.
Okay, nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So out of all of these events that you have given me, which event do you feel has had the biggest impact on you the most?
On me?
Yeah, on you personally.
Definitely the Avro Arrow incident.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Can you explain a little further how that has affected you personally?
How it affected? Okay, well, it definitely affected our family very much because my dad had worked for Avro, when it was shut down and the project was canceled, of course, he lost the job. And because of his age in his 50s, at that time, he really never had a good job since then. So it affected Toronto very, very much from an economic and job perspective because there was, I think it was 14,000 that worked directly in the plant that were out of a job. Okay. And a lot of other people in auxiliary kind of companies, that supplied things. But yeah, so that probably affected me, our family directly and the most.
Interesting.
Yeah. Do you want to know a little bit about what it was?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, Avro was asked by the government to build a supersonic interceptor jet. And that was back in the early 1950s. That's the time of the Cold War, when they felt the biggest, both the States and Canada felt that the biggest threat to peace from Russia was bombers coming over from Russia over Canada and bombing the States. And so they wanted a very good interceptor jet. And that's what this particular company, Avro, produced. It was called the Avro Arrow. At the time, it was probably, it was way ahead of everything else. It was the first Delta Wing plane. It had computer-assisted technology on board. The engine design was very, very unique, and the speed, it was supersonic. So as a kid, I used to hear the jets going over when they were testing them or flying them and hear the supersonic booms all the time. So it was really, really a part of our life in Toronto. And then the government canceled it in 1958, I think it was. 59. It was canceled by the Diefenbaker government. Yeah. Lots of reasons why. Nobody will ever know exactly why. There's certainly lots of speculation. There was cost overrun. Sputnik, Russia had put up Sputnik. So the thoughts at the time was that, bombers weren't going to be as dangerous to the countries, that missiles were going to be more important, and getting to space was probably more important. So those were some of the political factors or reasons, but the why exactly. But the thing that was bad about it was not only the economic effect on Toronto and the jobs lost and so on, but we lost our aircraft industry. And that company had been extremely productive. And there was a real brain drain to Nassau. They took a lot of the designers and engineers and so on down to Nassau, and it stopped our airline industry, which was a big factor. Anyways, that's what I know about it.
Interesting. Okay, so another thing I'd like to talk to you about is you gave me this other event that I've never heard of and I don't really know much about, and that is the October Crisis that took place in the 1970. And I was wondering if you could explain that event because I don't know much about it. So.
Okay, well, back in the 1960s, this organization in Quebec, the FLQ, what was it, the Fonds de Libération de Quebec or whatever. My French is not good, as you know. My pronunciation isn't good. But they really were promoting separatism, and they were quite a dangerous group, and they were doing a lot of bombings and robberies and so on and so forth, causing an awful lot of upheaval, not only in Quebec but throughout Canada, but especially in Quebec. And in October 1970, they kidnapped Pierre Laporte was his name.
Okay.
And he was a government, he was Minister of Immigration and Labor at the time, so he was a government official. They did end up killing him. Exactly when, I'm not sure. Within a week or so, they found his body, a week or two. So they kidnapped him and killed him, and they also kidnapped a man by the name of James Cross, who was a British trade commissioner. They didn't kill him. He finally did get released. Okay. But that brought in the world, especially England and whatever. It became very, very noticeable. So Quebec was not having any success. Getting rid of this FLQ and the separatism and so on. So they called in the federal government, and Trudeau was the prime minister at the time. He called it a terrorist act and invoked the War Measures Act for the first time in peacetime, and probably the only time in peacetime. He outlawed the FLQ. He detained people, and Quebec was, like, especially the big cities, Montreal and Quebec and so on, he sent in the army. Like, we had the army in all the cities and so on, and trying to stop the riots and the demonstrations and everything like that. So that was the October Crisis. And Trudeau was really criticized a lot. There was two sides to it. He went overboard. Some people thought he went overboard, went too far with sending in the army, and but other people thought it was very necessary to stop the terrorism from this particular group, that had gone far enough and it was time to put their foot down. In the end, it did stop them, no question. And from the FLQ, we still ended up with a lot of political parties that wanted separation. And that went on for quite a few years. It was still a very serious topic in all of Canada, but especially in Quebec.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, interesting. I've never heard of that, so that's interesting. Yeah. Let's see. Another one that I want to talk to you about is the Fair Accommodation Practice Act that was passed in Dresden, and I think you told me that is because you went and visited your uncle a lot down in Dresden, and I was just and I think you said that was your first real experience witnessing racial discrimination. So do you think you can talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that?
Well, Dresden is a very small town down in southwestern Ontario with all farming communities around there. And it was one of the terminations of the Underground Railway when there was still slavery in the States, and they came up and crossed into Canada, and it was called the Underground Railway. Dresden was a big terminus, and because it's very close to the States. And so there were a lot of black people in Dresden and in the surrounding areas. So like when I was a kid, I'd go down to visit my cousins and so on, and there were white baseball teams, there were black baseball teams, and it was very definitely whites only. But Dresden, they wouldn't allow black people in this. There was stores, restaurants, barbershops, churches, the Legion. Also, basically it was supposed to be a white community, and they, didn't allow the black people in. So it was very much like the racial unrest in the States that was going on, but it was on obviously a smaller scale because it was only happening in certain areas of Canada. And finally, the Ontario government in 1954 voted in the Fair Accommodation Practice Act, which basically made racism illegal.
Okay.
And tried to stop all the problems down there because there was, it was just riots and racism and so on. Yeah, the kids went to the same school, which is interesting. Yeah. They weren't segregated in school, but in the rest of their life, everything else they did, they were segregated.
Okay.
They couldn't be seen together.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Another question that I wanted to ask you was which one of these events in your eyes do you feel has impacted Canada the most, as a country?
I think the October crisis, because separatist big issue. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so another question is about the Canadian flag, because you were there at the time it was created, and that's an interesting thing because that was when Canada finally got a flag, I guess, which is really interesting. So can you explain to me how that was, what that was like?
Well, there was quite a lot of interest for a year or so because in 1964, our Prime Minister Pearson at the time, he said we really had a need to have a distinctive Canadian flag, and so they decided to take submissions, and I don't know, I think there was about 1,000 submissions. But they narrowed it down to 3 final designs, and from that they decided on the flag that we use today. Up until that time, there were any number of flags being used across Canada. Most of them had the Union Jack in it. A lot of them had the fleur-de-lis, but which is the Quebec symbol, of course. The red and white, interestingly, was Canada's national color since 1921. But it was 1964 before we got a flag with it. But that was proclaimed by King George V in 1921, that red and white would be our colors. And so that's, I think, probably why the red and white came about. And one of our biggest songs back then that we would sing was the Maple Leaf Forever. So Maple Leaf was considered to be a big symbol to Canada also, and that's why it got on the flag. The other 2 submissions had blue in them, which was Quebec color, and one of them had a fleur-de-lis and a Union Jack. signifying England and France, of course. But they were turned down. So I think I think it was the best decision to choose one that didn't highlight England or France.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Aboriginals weren't there at all at that time in conversations, for something like that. So, yeah, the Canada flag, that's about it.
Interesting. Okay, that's also really cool. Oh yeah, one event that we didn't touch on was Hurricane Hazel in 1954.
Before.
When it hit Toronto, and you said you were babysitting 2 kids at the time. So, how was that? Because that must be pretty scary, especially because you must have been really, really
I was
young
only
at the
12 at
yeah.
the time, yeah.
Yeah.
I had to pick up the 2 kids at school. We went to the elementary. I was in grade 8. These were younger kids. And take them home, and their mom and dad would be home within an hour or so. Well, that night, they didn't get home. I don't know how many hours I was there that night. It was a long time. Where we lived in Toronto was only about a mile and a half away from the big flood, the river that flooded. And my dad worked on the other side of the river from where we lived. He didn't get home. He couldn't get home because the flooding wiped out all the streets, all the bridges, all the roads. We lost houses galore. A few days afterwards, after he got home, we drove over and saw, and it's just like about a mile and a half away from where we lived. It was very close. And saw houses and refrigerators and dead animals and everything else floating down the river, what you normally see in a flood. The significance, the thing was that kind of a hurricane never happened in Toronto, the eastern coast, of course, does get the tail end tropical storms from the hurricanes coming up from the States, but Toronto, it never went that far inland until Hurricane Hazel. So nobody was expecting this. So it really affected future city planning. Had a big impact on that. They left green spaces afterwards, like the whole floodplain. They weren't allowed to build on it anymore. It became parkland and that kind of stuff. And they built some dams, and it created the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority at that time to control the environment from the water point of view, from flooding point of view. So I was totally involved in it. The house where the kids lived, the basement was flooded up to my knees.
Oh, wow.
The water was rushing in under the front door, and I was trying to prevent it from getting in on the carpet in the living room. So and then trying to keep the kids happy. It was big. It was a big day.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well then. Okay, so wrap up this interview. The last question I'd like to ask you is did any of these events change the way you view Canada?
Yep.
Yeah.
They all did to a certain extent, but I think the one that I hate to say it, but I think it was the flag.
Mm-hmm.
Probably changed most people's view the most because it became a symbol that we were a country. We weren't just what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it. Anyways, it really built up the national image. Because after that we had, "O Canada." Like when I was a kid, we didn't sing "O Canada." We sang "God Save the King" and "God Save the Queen." So it really showed we were a country, like at the Olympics and to the world. The flag was a big symbol of nationalism.
Yeah.
Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know, but at the time we were really considered a colony. But after the flag I think our view in the world started to really change.
Oh, okay.
I think the flag was an impetus for that. There are lots of other things, but was definitely one of them, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this has been well over 6 minutes.
6 minutes.
I think that we should wrap this up now. So, yeah, thank you for agreeing to do this with me. So,
Yeah.
so
I hope it's what you wanted.
oh yeah, no, this has been great. Thank you. All right. Okay.
Yeah, Canada history is actually quite fascinating when you get down to it.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
Yep.
So, I think I'm gonna end this here. So, see ya.
See you sometime in the future.